Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar covering fertiliser plans and the NMAX calculator process in CropWalker. For those of you unfamiliar with the webinar process, I'll just go through how it works and then just cover the agenda of what we're going to look at today. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded and a recording of this session will be sent out to you within 24 hours, which means you can play it back in your own time. The other thing is you're all muted, so you can't ask questions to me through speaking, but if you want to ask your questions, please type them into the chat box that is in the bottom right of your screen, at the bottom of the training panel, and I'll be stopping after each section of today's session to answer any questions that you have. Okay, so to move on to what we're going to cover in CropWalker, first of all we'll look at fertiliser plans, beginning with how to create a plan, and then the NMAX audit process that follows on from making a plan. We'll then go back and look at how to enter your fertiliser products, both manufactured, so fertiliser products and then organic manures, and we'll look at how this synchronises with RB209. And then I'll look at the NMAX manure categories that also synchronise with the products. After looking at fertiliser plans, I'll move on to look at the NMAX calculator. So first of all, looking at MVZ status of farms and fields, then moving on to look at the calculator itself and how it works out the adjustments to give you a running balance of N. And then I'll show you the report that can be generated out of this calculator. We'll finish by summarising and just going over again what we've gone through, and then at the end answering any more questions that you might have. Okay, so I'll go now into CropWalker and look at creating a fertiliser plan. So if I just click onto the fertiliser icon, and this brings up the screen which I can make any fertiliser plans. So as in the plan process, which I'm sure you're familiar with, first of all select my crop type, and then what appears below is a list of fields that contain this crop. So I select the fields that I want to treat just by clicking them to move them across into that selected fields area on the right. If I then move down, in the bottom half of the screen I've got the grid where I enter the fertiliser I want to apply, or the manure. This is the area for entering either or. So if you haven't used this area before, when you click this drop-down menu underneath type, you won't have anything appearing because fertilisers are set up individually against each farm or across all farms if you require, but these don't come from an automatic database. They have to be set up manually. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment. So if I just select the fertiliser that I want to apply, I can then enter an amount to apply per hectare, which will calculate a total amount when I click out of the box, which will calculate a total amount for the two fields. But here I also have the option of entering the amount of N in the units per hectare that I want to apply. So I can just click into that box and I can type in there if necessary. And that then calculates back the amount per hectare and the total amount for those two fields. The other thing you've got in this screen, if I just move across, is to the right of the fields area. You've got a little tick box that says enter as applied. This just means that when you're making a plan, if you tick that box, you're recording in the system that has been confirmed, that has been applied to those fields. So it saves the process of coming back and confirming plans. The other thing in this area is the proposed application date. You can set that to any date that you need to, just by clicking onto the drop-down and choosing the date. The other thing, as in the AgChem plan screen, is you can reduce the area that you want to treat just by clicking onto the field, then into the bright yellow adjust area box, and just typing directly into that. I then move down to show you the other areas of the screen. At the bottom of the screen, you've got this grid of the elements that the fertiliser you selected contains, and these are recorded as percentages. So here you've got 20% N, 10% P, and 10% K. Those are set when you enter a new product, and I'll show you, like I said, I'll show you how to do that in a moment. The final thing in this screen are the comments areas. So you've got a comment drop-down options, and these comments come through, as in AgChem plans, from comments that you've made before. So if I select an option there, you've also got a general comments box, which is a free text box, and you can type anything you like into this box, anything specific to do with that fertiliser plan. Just moving across, you can also select a machine and an operator if you have these set up. Okay, so once I've entered all these details, I simply just have to click onto Make Plan. And this is where the NMAX audit that I mentioned comes in. You can see, as in AgChem plans with the ProCheck audit, this just goes through and checks whether you're not exceeding the NMAX limit. And just one thing to note there is that NMAX only applies to farms or fields that are within an NVZ. And I'll show you that area when I move on to the NMAX calculator. Okay, so I'll just carry on then, clicking Make Plan, because I have no warnings appear. And those plans have been entered. Okay, so if I now just go back and show you what happens when I exceed the NMAX limit. So if I just up the rate of fertiliser I'm applying in this box, and I'll leave everything else the same. If I then click Make Plan, you can see how the audit system has worked and produced a limit because I would be applying too much N to those fields. As in the AgChem plan screen, you can enter a justification and override this by again clicking onto the Make Plans button. But for the time being, I'll just cancel that. Okay, so that is the basic fertiliser plan process. If I just skip back to the agenda, I've just covered there creating a fertiliser plan and the NMAX audit system that goes through. Now I'm going to look at with you how to enter a new product. That's a fertiliser product and a manure product. And when doing this, I'll look at how this synchronises with the RB209 information, and then look at the NMAX manure categories. Okay, so if I just go back into CropWalker, And back into this fertiliser plan screen. So to enter a new fertiliser product, because if you haven't used this screen before, you won't have any fertilisers set up. So as in the Ag Chem Town products area, if I just click onto this type link in the bottom half of the screen, at the top of that grid where I entered my fertiliser, it takes me to a screen where I can enter new fertilisers and manures. So the first thing I'll show you how to enter a fertiliser. So you can see that at the top there are the different tabs, fertilisers and manures. It defaults, CropWalker defaults to this fertilisers tab, so if I just leave it there, click onto the new button, I then have an area appear at the bottom of the screen where I can enter my new fertiliser. So if I just type a name in there, I can then select the unit, and in this grid underneath I can enter the elements that are contained within this fertiliser, and these are as a percentage at this point. So if I just enter some figures there, click Save, that is now saved in my list of fertilisers against that farm. The other options you have here, if you're using the same fertilisers and you have more than one farm, you are using them across the different farms. If I just click in the small grey box to the left hand side of that fertiliser that I've just created, I then have the option down here in the middle, it's Copy to All Farmers button. If I click that, then that fertiliser will be available when making fertiliser plans on all my farms. Okay, so there I've just gone through adding a new fertiliser product. Now I'm going to look at adding a new manure product with you and the RB209 synchronization here. So at the top of this, staying on this screen, at the top of the screen, if I click now onto this manures tab, you can then see a list of manures that I've already set up. And I'll now just click onto the new button to add a new manure in there. And you can see I've got another area that appears at the bottom of the screen, and the cursor, the mouse, first appears in that RB209 name. So this comes, if I click that drop down, you can see there are a load of different manures in there, and they come from the RB209 fertiliser manual. So if I just select the manure I want to add, and then click out of the box, I get a message asking me if I want to update the figures with the planet defaults. So if I click yes to this, it automatically enters the percentage of elements that are contained within this manure. And that's what I meant when I mentioned the RB209 product synchronization. You can see it's 3% N, 2.5p, and so on. It's also copied the name across to that manure name. And the other thing I was going to show you is it's selected a NMAX category. And if I just click into that box to show you the different categories you have, you've got a list of 5 different categories there. And this is just to do with the amount of nitrate that is available within these manures. Each category has a different percentage of the total. So if you see cattle slurry back in the grid at the top of the screen, there's a high percentage of nitrogen available than, say, other livestock manures. Okay, so once I've added those details, I just click to save that manure, and it's now added into my system, available on that farm. So if I close out of there, just going back to my fertiliser plan, I click into this drop-down box underneath type again. You can see that the two products I've just entered, nitram and broiler turkey litter, have been added into that list. Okay, so if I just close out of there now and go back, that's most of everything that I wanted to cover for fertiliser plants. I'm just going to show you a couple more handy areas of this part of CropWalker that will help you out when making future plans. So before I stop for questions, if I just go back to CropWalker and back into the fertiliser plan screen, just want to show you the area where you can look back on previous plans that have been made. So for your reference, you wanted to see what had been applied last year. You can do this within this screen. So if I choose the crop that I want to see previous plans for, and then select the field that I want to view, or if I want to apply the plant to all fields, I move them all across, and I then select the field that I want to view by clicking on it to highlight it in blue. I then move across and click this button on the top right hand side of the screen, show previous, which then brings up a grid at the bottom of the screen and will show me all previous fertiliser plans and manure plans that have been applied to this field. So you can see only one has been made there, but if several have been made in the past, they'll all appear here. Okay, so to go back to your Make Plan screen, just click onto that Show Previous button again. You can also here, at this point, use the F9 screen, which I talked about before. So if you click the F9 button on your keyboard, this gives you a field and crop summary of everything that has been applied to that field. So that could be chemical plans, field work, and any action that's been made on that field. So that's another way of viewing what's previously been applied to the field selected. And that opens up on top of the fertiliser plan screen, so you won't lose what you were working on at that moment. So I'm going to close out of there again now. And I'll just finish this fertiliser plans area by showing you the report that can be generated once you've made your plans. So to view this report, if I click onto the print button, I then get a print preview window appearing, and there are some options you can choose what will appear on your reports by ticking the boxes. So for example, the print days, or you can group by crops. Moving over to the third column, you can choose to show the variety of the crops. Okay, so then if I just move down, if I've made a plan today, and the plan date's default to today's date, you can see that I already have a farmer in the selected farmers box, but if nothing appears here, you might just need to move these dates backwards to view plans that have been made previously. So once I've chosen what to appear on my report, I just click the Print Preview button. You then have details of what's been made in that fertiliser plan. So starting on the left in red, you've got the field details, the crop, and the variety, and then the area to be treated, that's also in red. Then moving down underneath the fields, you've got fertiliser details, the rate to be applied, That's then converted into the rate of N, P and K and the total amount required. You can see that plan number 4. If I click onto this across arrow, that shows me the next plan that's been made, so it's one plan per page. As with AgChem reports, this can also be either printed for your records or sent as a PDF attachment via email by using this export to email option. And that attaches the plan to an email and sends it to the address entered for that farm. Okay, so if I close out there and just go back to what I've covered, and I'll now look at some of your questions that have come through. And just to remind you, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them at any point by typing them into the chat box in the bottom right-hand side of the training panel. Okay, so I've had a few questions come through. The first one is, the question is, can you add different units when adding new products? And I'll just go into CropWalker and show you again how this is done, because you can change the unit when you're adding a new product. So if I click onto that type button to get the area where I can enter a new product, then if I click onto new and the fertilizers, and you'll see the units drop down. I can just change that at this point into either tons or kilos, whatever is required. And once I've entered my fertilizer name and the elements, I click save, that will be recorded in that unit. So if I just cancel out of there, just going through the questions. I had a question, how do you see available nutrients from manures on the fertilizer planning page rather than total nutrients required? So if I just go back to the fertilizer planning page and choose my crop and then select the manure that I want to apply. Ignore that. If I then enter the amount, just by typing into the box that I want to apply, it then calculates in the grid to the right the amount of N, P and K in units per hectare, so that's in kilos per hectare for that manure. And it calculates that back from the total amount that I've entered. But I'm just thinking, you've said available nutrients, you have to process your fields through Planet to get the available nutrients figure, and that we'll be covering in another webinar. Okay, so if I just go back to my agenda, I'm now going to look at the NMAX calculator process with you. So first of all, the NVZ status, then I'll look at the NMAX adjustments and how this calculates the running balance of N, and then show you the report that can be generated out of this process. Okay, so if I go back to CropWalker, the NMAX calculator is found by clicking the drop-down arrow just to the right of the fertilizer icon and selecting NMAX calculator from the bottom of this drop-down. So the first thing I have to do here is select my crop. And if I just select winter barley, as I've just applied some plants to it, I then can select either current or previous cropping. So you'll see my list of fields appearing in the grid now that contain this winter barley crop. Moving across, you've got field name, variety and area. The first adjustment that you can make is the expected yield adjustment. So if I just click into one of these areas, so if I click onto the expected yield column, I then get some information in the grid underneath. Each adjustment here gives you some information to help you along with the process. So the expected yield, if this is higher than the standard yield, for wheat and barley it will give you an additional 20 kilos of nitrogen that can be applied. So if I show you by entering my expected yield here, clicking out of the box, if I move across now and look under the adjustments column, you can see that another 20 kilos of hectare, another 20 kilos of N has been allowed to be applied to that field, just from entering that expected yield column. Moving across then to the next column in the yellow area is the mulch applied column. This also gives you an increase in the amount of N that is permitted to be applied to each field. So again, if I just click into this column, you can see information about this area as well. And you can see that moving across under the adjustments column, another 80 kilos of N has been permitted, as I've selected that mulch has been applied. The other area in this NMAX calculator is the soil type. And for medium soil type, that won't give you any more N to be applied, but if I just click onto that and reveal that information again, it tells me that shallow soil type will allow another 20 kilos of N to be added. So if I just go out of this screen and remind you where you set the soil type. So underneath the menu on the left hand side, if I click onto farm details, soil type can be set across all fields in this screen, at the bottom right of the screen, or, as I just want to show you that field, can be set on a field by field basis. That's in the Add Fields and Crops area, and then by clicking Add Edit Fields, I can just select the field I want to change the soil type for, select shallow and close out of there. So if I just go back to the NMAX calculator and back to that field to show you how that is now adjusted, you can see that lower bank field has now got another 20 kilos of N that can be applied, and that comes from setting the soil type as shallow. The next thing, just moving across now, the calculator will work out for you the adjusted NMAX limit, so you can see where I've made those adjustments of the yield, mulch and soil type. I've got an extra 120 there, so I've got 300 over the previous figure of 180. This then works out in kilos for the whole field, the NMAX limit. And then the green column gives you the current amount of N that has been applied, that has already been applied to those fields. So if I just, one thing I forgot to mention, I was going to mention about the MVZ status and just remind you where you can find this, because the NMAX calculator only applies to MVZ, to farms or fields within an MVZ. So if I just go back to the farm details menu and show you where that MVZ button is. It's at the bottom, there's a tick box at the bottom right of that screen, and that puts all fields on that farm within an MVZ. As for soil type, you can choose whether fields are in an MVZ on a field-by-field basis. This is done in the Add Fields and Crops screen. By clicking Add, Edit Fields, select on the fields that are within the MVZ, and then choosing from this drop-down whether or not they're within that area. Okay, just to go back to the NMAX calculator now, and to look at the few last things in this area. So if I look to the right of the screen now, I've got the NMAX limit for each field before adjustments. So you can see that 180 kilos of N are permitted per hectare at the top. If I then move down, this is where the calculator works out the totals for me. So the maximum limit for N applied to the crop type is the sum of the NMAX per field column. So that is the amount of N that can be applied in kilos to each field. And that's the total for all the fields that contain that crop. And then move down to the next area, the average NMAX limit. This is the figure after adjustments, and as I made some adjustments there with the expected yield, mulch applied, and the shallow soil type, which gave me an extra amount of N that I could apply. This box then calculates the average for all fields, the limit of nitrogen that can be applied in kilos per hectare. Moving down then, the green box, that just echoes that green column at the end and calculates the average amount of N that has been applied to all fields. Then finally, the balance box at the bottom just gives me the amount of N that I'm allowed left to apply. Okay, so if I just go back now to my agenda there, I jumped around a bit, but I showed you the MVZ status and farms and fields, which is what the NMAX calculator applies to. So that can be found within the farm details screen if the whole farm is within a nitrate vulnerable zone, or it can be done on a field-by-field basis in the Add Fields and Crops screen. I then showed you the NMAX calculator itself and how to make any adjustments in there, and how that then calculates the running balance of N for you. So now if I just show you the report that can be generated from this calculator. So if I go back to CropWalker and my NMAX calculator screen. Once I've made all my adjustments, if required, I can now click on this print button, which gives me another print preview screen. So if I select the crop type that I want to view, to move it over into selected crops, and then click onto the print preview button. This NMAX summary report basically mirrors what I've just entered into that NMAX calculator. So first of all, you have the nitrogen limit that is calculated for each field. So you can see halfway down the lower bank my adjustments that I've made there, and then the adjusted NMAX limit that is calculated for me, as well as the average that can be applied across all fields and the total for each field. The next area of this report is the application area. So this just gives me details of how much N has already been applied. So first of all, field details, and then moving across, I've got first of all fertiliser, so how much N has been applied. First of all, in kilos per hectare from fertiliser, and then the total for that field. Then moving across, I've got how much nitrogen is available from manures for those fields. So again, per hectare and then per field. Then got the last two columns, total nitrogen rate from both manures and fertilisers that has been applied. Again, per hectare and then for the whole field. As I showed you in that fertiliser plan report, this can also be printed or sent by email for your records. I now just close out of there, close that, and go back to my agenda before I answer any questions. Please send any questions you have through by typing them into the chat box. And I'll try and answer a few of these before we finish now. So following fertiliser plans, how to create a plan, I've just been through the NMAX calculator and finally just showed you the NMAX report there. And now I'll just have a look at your questions. I've had a question. The question is, are NVZ requirements the same in Scotland and England? And that's a good question. No, the NVZ requirements are not the same, and this is where it's important in the farm detail screen that you select the region that you require, because this will affect the NVZ requirements. So selecting England and Wales will set different requirements to selecting Scotland for that region. Another question I had is, how do you set the expected yield in the NMAX calculator? So if I go back to my NMAX calculator and select my crop, to enter an expected yield, what you need to do is choose which field you want to enter that yield against. Just click into the expected yield column and just type your figure into that column. Oh, sorry, I've just seen the other part of the question is that what is the default expected yield? I'm going to have to check on that question, but I do know that for every tonne that the expected yield is over the standard yield, that is when an additional amount of N will be permitted. But I will check that question and get back to you. And finally, just before we finish, got time for one more question. That question is, where does it show up if N max limits are exceeded? So if I just go back, this shows up when making fertiliser plans. So if I go into my fertiliser plan screen and then select the field I want to apply the fertiliser to, if I select my fertiliser, enter a figure there, and then click onto the Make Plan button. This is where it goes through an auditing system to check whether the NMAX limit has been exceeded. You can see there, it's giving me a red warning, telling me that I've applied too much nitrogen over the limit that is permitted. So that's when you click onto Make Plan in the fertiliser plan screen. Okay, so that's all I've got time for now. Any questions that I haven't been able to answer, I will look into them and send you the answers, the responses via email within the next 24 hours. Just to remind you that this webinar is being recorded as well, so you will also receive the recording of that. And finally, just to let you know, next webinar is due to take place this Friday, Friday the 15th, at 11 AM, and that will be covering the planet area of CropWalker, so it's quite a good follow-on from this session. Finally, when you close out of this training session, the questionnaire will appear, and if you could just spare a few minutes to answer these few questions, it would be really helpful for our future training sessions. Okay, thank you everyone.